Okay, so I did kind of a deep dive into some crime statistics involving firearms. Most of this happened just as a result of, or like in the wake of the Bondi Beach massacre, and just, kind of looking at the arguments to further restrict gun ownership in Australia, and, arguments to open it up, make it more less restrictive, more free, in a sense, like emulating like what we have in America compared to a lot of the other former like British Empire, British territories. So disclaimer before I get into kind of the weeds on some of this stuff. All of the stats and numbers are from like official sources, like government sources. There are some anecdotal things that it'll be pretty obvious like when I'm talking about that versus what's actually like on graphs or in charts, but all of those come from various government websites, like international governments, the FBI, different both pro and anti Second Amendment like databases, because they present information differently. Not that they lie, but they omit things, or they try to like kind of like change your perception. So like for instance, after gun restrictions for like concealed carry were lifted, like so that constitutional carry was enacted, an anti-Second Amendment news outlet might talk about how, as soon as constitutional carry was enacted, incidents involving gunshots and gun violence increased. And you say, oh wow, the takeaway, the way that they're framing the information is basically trying to get you to think, they lessened restrictions, so more people were committing crimes. But in actuality, when you actually look at the statistics, it's, they lessened restrictions, and then people were using constitutional carry and defending themselves against people who were, either trying to attack them, rob them, like whatever. And so, of course, that goes down as, that was an instance of gun violence, or, the violence involving a firearm. But it isn't what they're trying to portray, right? They're trying to create guns bad versus guns good, and both sides do it, right? So that's kind of a first disclaimer. The second one is that a lot of the numbers are solid, but there are certain numbers that are ranges. So for example, I might look up the number of firearm deaths in the US, and there might be 3 different numbers for that, but they're all within, they're all within acceptable ranges of like, 46,800 versus 46,720, right? So in cases like that, I tried to put, kind of the squiggle just to let you know, like it's approximate, and that's me averaging between whatever numbers I was able to find. If there were outliers, I researched further, tried to figure out why it was an outlier. Most of the time it comes down to reporting. I did a little bit of international comparison. I found some different reporting criteria from different countries. And so that's where you can kind of get into what constitutes aggravated assault in America isn't necessarily the same as in England and Wales, but that might be different from Scotland. So when that is relevant, like I'll try to remember to mention that. So first off, U.S. firearm overview. So the United States has the highest private gun ownership per capita of any nation in the world. There's roughly 120 privately owned firearms per 100 people. So I believe we're the only country that's positive, like over 100 per 100, and I don't think it's close. That'll actually be in a different video that I plan on doing. So most of the numbers that I took were 2023, just because when I first started this, it was like a month ago, so 2025 still had plenty of time left. And then some agencies lag in reporting. So you don't get like 2024 until 2026. You don't get 2023 until 2025. So I decided I'm going to back up 2 years. It's still relevant. And it's post-COVID. Not that COVID didn't affect some of these numbers. But there definitely was a change across a lot of numbers and a lot of per capita statistics based on trends versus like 2021 and 2022 kind of being like outliers in some regards. And then 2023 is actually seen as kind of a rebound year in a lot of places. So overall, just looking at it, 2023, there's roughly 46,728 firearm deaths in the United States. Kind of a shocking statistic right here is 58% of those are suicides. So the plurality and majority of U.S. firearm deaths are actually suicides. The second largest would be murders at 39%. It is important to note here that the percentage of homicides, guns are responsible for about 80% of homicides in the United States. And I mean, that trend kind of carries where, again, you know, like if you look at 2015, 2018, 2022, 2025, it's always kind of floating, where it might be 78% one year, it might be 81% the next year. But that through line exists. So these are pretty comparable to like every other year. Although it is important to note that since like 1972, we've been trending downward, both in terms of just violent crime in general and the murder rate. There was a spike since 2020 through 2024, but that has since gone back down. I think I saw a headline saying that we are in like the largest single year drop in the murder number of murders in the United States, like I think in recorded history. And then, the last bit is 3% accidents. So that's typically, either somebody is cleaning a firearm, they don't check it, it's not safe, and they accidentally hurt or kill themselves or another person, or like accidental discharge because you're being dumb and not being safe. So that's what the 3% would be. Now breaking down the homicides, which is that 39% of the roughly 47,000, there's about roughly 18,223 firearm homicides. It was interesting, and when you look at it, it actually makes sense, where 53% are handguns, right? And I was actually really surprised to see this, that assault-style rifle, which I assume means a semi-automatic rifle, not a bolt-action rifle, not a lever-action rifle, or any other type of action, like break action, something like that, was only 4% of homicides. Shotguns, 1% or less, and then unconfirmed was a larger percentage than I expected. But I understand, like kind of putting my mind to it, I think that is mostly that, one, not every murder is solved, obviously, and you can guess as to what it is, but you cannot confirm what it is based on bullet entry, bullet exit, where you can say, calibers, for instance, right? There's like a 90% chance that if somebody is found dead with 9mm bullet wounds, that it was fired out of a handgun, right? Just a common, Glock, SIG, Smith & Wesson, very common caliber 9mm. However, there is still a chance that it could be a pistol calibered carbine. So it could be a something resembling more of a rifle platform that fires what were traditionally considered to be handgun loads. That might be a 9mm 40 Smith & Wesson 45 ACP or 10mm. And the inverse can be true too, where, nowadays you can have really kind of funny, like Kentucky ballistics, where you're firing like rifle cartridges basically out of like revolvers. The other thing that makes a lot of sense to me for the handgun percentage being so large is that they're the most readily available. They're also the easiest to conceal. They're the easiest to hide. And if you are somebody who is likely going to commit a homicide, you are likely going to try to conceal your weapon, right? You are not going to be walking around with a, full length, 18 or 22 inch barrel AR-15, and plan to just not have the police called on you before you do what you're going to do. It'll come up later, but the generally accepted conservative estimate for the number of homicides that are gang and drug related is 16%, and that could be as high as 20 to 25%. So anywhere from 16% to 25% of homicides in the US per year are attributed to gang violence or drug related violence. So that's kind of the overview, and I would just say that for unconfirmed, I think it's pretty safe to kind of keep the proportionality between these, where, it's likely that, half of this 42% that's unconfirmed, maybe probably even more, is handgun. But unfortunately, we don't have those numbers, and I found out that this is actually pretty common, either because the gun gets ditched, they can't 100% confirm because they do not have the weapon in question. So it is, it's better to just leave it in the unconfirmed, uncategorized section instead of misattribute it. So another thing that I looked at because obviously, looking here, these are crimes committed, at least in terms of homicides. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of statistics that are solid for other crimes committed or enabled because of firearms being used by the criminal. So, for example, like a mugging, where the firearm might be presented as a threat. It's not used. It might not be real. It might be real. But it was not used. It was not fired. But the person gave up their wallet or watch or whatever. But they might not report that every time. And reporting is something that we're going to get into a little bit later in some of the challenges with reporting and different violent crimes and different violent crime statistics, which kind of make compiling data like this challenging. So looking at the crimes, now I wanted to look at the crime prevention estimates. So think about the mugging example, but inverse. So in this situation, there's somebody with a knife who's trying to mug somebody else, and that victim either, well, I guess it would be brandishing no matter what. So they basically show or pull a firearm and brandish in order to deter the mugging from happening. These numbers here on the left, like the actual estimates, are where firearms were actually, I believe, used. So shots were heard, something happened, or another person saw something, or the victim reported it later. So this is where like confirmed estimates would be that like roughly 60,000 cases per year. This would be kind of the top end. Those are ones that are very likely but not 100% confirmed. And then there was a 2021 study through the, actually it was kind of similar, the National Crime Victimization Survey that found a significantly higher number. So that could be as high as, 1.5 to 1.7 million cases every single year where a firearm is used to deter a crime from happening. And so when we take kind of a rough estimate between these numbers, or a rough average between these numbers, we end up with, I should have had that number right there, like specifically, but we basically end up with 1.4 million. I have it down here. 1.4 million preventions, as opposed to 18,223 homicides annually. So those are directly attributed to firearms, right? Obviously, firearms might be used in different crimes and help enable different crimes, whether that's robbery or assault or something else. So I'm just looking at overall crime prevention, but comparing it just to homicides. I thought it was important to include this as well because I was actually surprised once I got into this a little bit deeper how low some of the numbers were, where in 2023 the US had deaths by these following causes. So we had 680,000 deaths from heart disease, 613,000 from cancer, 162,000 from accidents. So I wasn't sure, I couldn't find whether or not that included potential gun accidents, like accidents involving a firearm. But just remember that of the deaths by firearm in the United States, only 3%, or roughly 3%, are accidents. So if it does or if it doesn't, it shouldn't move this number very much at all. Following up on accidents, we have stroke, which now it looks like I probably put the wrong number. I'll edit this in post. Overall homicide. So, I mean, it's obviously that's still a large number that's still concerning. I believe that equates to about 5.7 or 5.8 per 100,000 citizens or people. So, but, in comparison to the other causes of death, very small in relation. And I mean, there are more in here too. Like diabetes is a really, really big one. Interstitial lung disease. There's a bunch of stuff that are car accidents, which I assume makes up probably the majority of this, or the plurality at least. But even if you just break off car accidents, you're significantly more likely to die in a car accident than you are by a non-negligent or homicide or a murder. And then even less so when it's specifically done with a firearm. And then I kind of dipped into this a little bit with because it seems like it's constantly an issue, especially following the Bondi Beach massacre was what kind of prompted me to follow through on this and actually finish this video. Was so that's kind of why I felt like it was appropriate to include mass shooting numbers as well, which I'm going to break down in the next slide. So 754 in 2023, and that fluctuates year by year. Both the number killed and the number of mass shootings that occur, it floats between 600 and 800. You get random spikes, like obviously some years are worse than others, and it's happenstance in a lot of cases. Over here, so the definition or how it's defined for a mass shooting, both by like the Violence Project, Gun Violence Archive, I think it's on Wikipedia as well, like how they characterize what is and isn't a mass shooting. It is that there are more than 4 people shot or injured, not including the shooter. So if somebody does a drive-by, kills one person, that would not be considered a mass shooting, even if it was into a group of people, based on these numbers. So that's again, like that's where it's hard for the reporting, because different places and different agencies or groups have different definitions that vary from one another. Like even the FBI, they define like mass shootings the same way, but what they have is active shooter incidents, which has a different qualifier. So there's all these different qualifiers, all these different factors that can change the numbers. And in a lot of cases, it's not by much, right? Like, Violence Project might report 611 incidences, but then the FBI might say, oh, actually, there were 619 for that same year. So again, anytime that there was anything that was just a weird statistical anomaly, I tried to look at, and try to examine why, and it always came down to difference in reporting and different criteria, and so those ones were omitted. Not that there were many. There was probably only 3 statistical lines that I was like, I can't include these. One of them is going to be, I'm going to touch on for Northern Ireland, and one for Scotland. But if we look here, so from 2020 through 2024, we've got 614 incidences, 693, 644, 604. So that's individual occurrences of an event happening where more than 4 people were shot or injured. In those cases, in those years, those cases produced 2,500, 2,800, 2,600, etc. Injured people who were injured who did not later die from their injuries, and then anywhere from 450 to 754 for the number killed, and then I included the number of average deaths per event, which the mortality rate is, they're low numbers overall in comparison to 330 million people, but I was pretty surprised to see most of the time it's like 1/4 or 1/5 of the casualties, I guess you could say, or 1/5 or 1/6 of the casualties were mortal, so they were killed. But I was actually really surprised to find these numbers. And actually these get even more surprising when you look at the FBI active shooter incidences. So this excludes all gang violence, drug-related violence, domestic situations, hostage situations. These are typically, the majority of these cases are places of employment and educational facilities. So this is, it's terrible, but it is usually, either people going into a former place of business and quote unquote going postal, as the old term used to be, going into schools. A big example would be the Vegas shooting. That was, that would be included in these numbers as well. So once you pull out gang violence, drug violence, domestic, so that could be a situation with a family, that could be, something that isn't just a, not that it's fully random, right? When, these maniacs plan something, they plan it. They go, I'm going to go to the movie theater in Aurora. I'm going to go to Parkland. I'm going to go to Vegas and rent this room and be up. So it's not random in the sense of there's no planning involved, but these are just the spontaneous, I guess, instances of mass shootings that occur. And again, I just took 2020 through 2024, 2025, it's the 28th, so the numbers are mostly in, but again, I didn't want to include that year or this year because some of the numbers for different criteria weren't. I do believe everything that I looked at, the databases were up to date, like current as of yesterday for mass shootings, and we're actually trended downward again. I don't think we were as low as 2024, but this kind of like dip that's just naturally been happening over the last 4 years, I believe that basically continued. Don't quote me on that one though. So, then just, that kind of helps us understand how gun violence occurs in the United States, between homicides, between suicides, accidents, looking at mass shootings, and talking about gang versus non-gang violence, which again it's not exact. You can't exactly quantify it. So I was like, okay, let's pull back a little bit. Let's look at some international cases. So for the international cases, just defined as violent crime, meaning murder / non-negligent homicide, rape, robbery. So the difference between there with like robbery and theft or larceny is that it's not, in this case, it is not property theft or property larceny, like anything like that. It is strictly person to person. Think a mugging, think strong-armed robbery, bank robbery, something like that. That is where violence is used, or the threat of violence is used in order to steal, money, cars, material, whatever. That's what robbery means on this slide. And then aggravated assault. This is tricky in some areas. So finding these numbers was kind of hard, where, for example, Japan has a different definition of, or they count different assault differently. So for them, they include aggravated assault as verbal and nonverbal, or they categorize it between verbal and nonverbal. So if you have nonverbal assault, that could literally be that wouldn't be aggravated assault, but they would include under assault, they would have where limited bodily harm was done, where severe bodily harm or injury occurred. Then there is verbal threats, which are under, I guess Japan counts those as assault, which they should, but they count it in their total. So like this number originally was like 35 or 36. So then I had to go in and dive deeper, use a lot of like translation on web pages through Chrome, and basically find out, I don't want to skew it by looking at, just somebody threatening or somebody, pulling a fist back or something like that, because under Japanese law or Japanese jurisprudence, that could constitute assault. But they just report it as assault. You have to go in and pick things through. So I came to this number, 12.74, which I vetted 3 times. I think this is within 1. It might be as high as 13.5. It might be as low as 11.5. But I found that this was a number I felt comfortable putting out there. So obviously, this jumps out right away is the number of assaults in the UK. And the UK is interesting because they report crimes differently for England and Wales versus Northern Ireland versus Scotland. So for example, with aggravated assault, that in Scotland, that also includes, that excludes numbers where the crime is sexual in nature, but it was not a full rape, basically. And then, so it's interesting because the very minor differences in counting allow the English and Welsh government to count separately, because Scotland is significantly more violent than England and Wales. Obviously Glasgow has been notorious for being the stabbing capital of the world off and on for the last 10 years at this point. They have really high levels of drug use, just high violence in general in Scotland. And so trying to get this aggregate number was kind of interesting to see the differences in different crimes and the rates that they occurred across the 4 different countries, or the kingdoms within the UK. And I didn't know that Northern Ireland is actually one of the highest per capita, like, and it's by a margin for domestic violence. And that's like something that they've been trending down with. But, you know, if you picked out like the last 20 years, they would lead in that category for many of the years when compared to like any other country of similar development. So that was another thing that I learned that I really wasn't expecting to learn. But the other, you know, obviously that stands out tall. And when you look at these cases stacked up across, obviously something's going on over here with Malaysia, Japan. I wanted to do more, and I eventually I think that'll be another video where I tried first to do India, then I tried to do Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia actually too. But again, reporting and crime statistics reporting is really tricky, because it's kind of like a country has to be developed enough to have enough of an infrastructure and, you know, keeping their own data in birth records, death records, and compiling these archives. So for example, when I tried to look up statistics for Nigeria, good luck. You know, like they can make estimates and they can make, estimates for like the murder rate, right? Because I also found that in these cases, the most accurate numbers are the murder numbers. And, you know, at first I was like, man, why can't I, you know, everything comes with qualifiers for underreporting or whatever. And I kind of realized, oh, well, I guess, you know, if there's a murder, it's either a body was found or somebody went missing and was never found. And that's really obvious when that happens, you know. The body gets discovered, oh, it is full of bullets. Obviously, this guy was murdered. So boom, there's a murder number. But in a lot of cases with sexual assault and rape, there is a large variance of what these numbers say and what they actually are. Obviously that's because a lot of people don't report it after it happens, either because they're ashamed or they're scared or there's just stigma. And that's totally understandable. But unfortunately for this graph, it also, a lot of these numbers came with qualifiers where they'll say, oh, it could be 10 to 20 times larger than the reported number, just because of not wanting to come forward and not wanting to, put themselves or somebody else through whatever happened. Robberies, I don't think it would happen quite as much. I don't have any statistics to back that up, but just using my brain, I would imagine that robberies are underreported less than rapes and sexual assaults are. Sometimes people don't even know that a robbery occurs. If it's somebody broke into your car and took something and you didn't even notice it, or I guess that would actually be theft. That wouldn't even be robbery. So but like, if somebody attempts to rob you and they're like, they hold you up and they say, give me your money. And it's like, dude, I only have cards. I'm not wearing a watch. Like, I'll give you my wallet and I'm just going to cancel all my cards. And then they go, oh shit. And then they leave. Right now, I personally, I don't think I would report that to the police if I couldn't clearly identify that person, either through like a visible tattoo or if they had their face showing. Then if I saw something like that, it'd be okay. I should at least file a report, get that information out there. So-and-so has like this description, but realistically, they're not going to find that guy if you don't have anything solid to go off of. If you just go up to them and say, well, he was definitely a guy, his eyebrows were dark, so he's either a brunette or he has black hair. It was kind of dark. I couldn't really tell what his skin tone was because he was wearing gloves and he was wearing a mask. But he was roughly 5'11". You know, he could be anywhere from 180 to 200 pounds. It's like, they're not going to find that guy. So it's like, why even waste your time reporting that? So I imagine that there is a decent amount of underreporting for robberies. But I would imagine that it's not nearly to the point that... you know, because that, like, unless you're like egotistical and just that typical, like a toxic guy, I don't think people would feel stigmatized for reporting a robbery. Aggravated assault, I imagine that these get reported pretty often. Because typically it these basically mean that it results in an injury, which means that, you know, either the wound is visible, like, you know, you have a black eye or a broken orbital bone or something like that, or you need medical attention. And so then when you go to the hospital, they might have somebody to like, hey, like, tell us what happened. We're going to fill out a report for you. So I imagine that happens even less with underreporting. And I might be wrong about that. But murder seems very accurate because, you know, habeas corpus, here's the body. And if you look, the United States, you know, I saw numbers from 5.7 to 5.9 for 2023. So obviously, we have a higher murder rate than in the UK, than in Germany, Malaysia, Japan. You know, where you're looking here and you go, oh, that's a 12 times factor almost between likelihood per 100,000 people of being murdered. And but when you compare the United States to, you know, for example, the UK, Germany, Brazil, you know, well, Brazil, I believe they were the highest, like, high confidence number. When I was trying to find information about Nigeria, I believe it was about 32 to 34, but there's asterisks involved with all of those, just because they don't have the infrastructure to maintain records that are reliable. So Brazil is significantly more, you're more likely to die, just based on the murder rate. And just looking at this, I mean, in the UK and in Germany, you're much more likely to be assaulted. And this led me to some interesting conclusions, just looking at those, which I'll get into on the next slide, where I'll just kind of do an overview with analysis. But I was really shocked. I've been to both of these countries. And I felt totally safe over here. And it's interesting to see that sense that I got reflected in the numbers. I mean, Japan, that's not a surprise, right? We always hear about, you know, Japan leading the way in a lot of things with, you know, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's equality, just basically being peaceable and being nonviolent people, like, domestically. Versus, you know, Brazil. Like, I think, you know, when you think of Brazil, you think of like a lot of drug-related crime, a lot of violence, like lower development, lower equality. You know, the photos of like Rio de Janeiro, where you have the I think they're favelas up on the hills, and you've got like the multi-million-dollar apartments in the valleys, you know, and there's just that stark contrast of poverty versus excess. So I feel like that isn't terribly surprising. I was surprised at the number in Germany, because, you know, just going through these, you know, you go, oh yeah, like really low murder rate. Oh, you know, they have a really low rape rate, low robbery, and then it was just boom, aggravated assault. And I want to kind of look into this number and the UK, honestly, just for trends over the years, looking at if there's correlation, or how much of a correlation there is between the like immigration policy versus violence versus just delve and just see what there is to see, because like I said, a lot of the stuff I was surprised by. So looking at the overhead, the analysis is that guns in the United States, they cause a lethality issue, not a violence issue. So I'll back up again. When you look here, the total number of violent crime is significantly lower than the UK or Germany or Brazil. And Brazil has a lot of guns per capita, like the United States. Germany doesn't, the UK doesn't. And so I feel like when you look at the numbers and you stack it up with that information, it makes sense. If you are committing an aggravated assault or attempting a murder with a firearm, you're going to be much more likely to succeed than if you're doing it with a knife or a bludgeoning weapon or your hands and feet, right? So the lethality is evident when I look at those numbers, but the actual violence is actually a lot lower. Like I was really shocked to see how low our numbers were for the aggregate violent crime, and I was really, really surprised to see the UK. Like I feel like you hear it in the news, you do whatever, but I was expecting it to be roughly equal to the United States. So that was surprising. And then Germany, I thought Germany was going to kind of be more along the lines of like Malaysia and Japan. Just, that reputation of being structured and orderly, and they're Western, so they're individualistic in nature, but they still have like collectivism. They have more social programs, they have more common identity than I think in America, where I think Americans, speaking as one, just when you look at it side by side, the culture, next to just about any other culture in the world, I feel like we are the most selfish, and if we're not, we're definitely like top 5. And that is one of my takeaways, was that is a big modifier, a huge modifier even. So my analysis is Second Amendment, it causes a lethality issue, not a violence issue in the United States. I was surprised to find that it is much safer than it feels. And a lot of that, I think, is chalked up to, this is an old media slogan, if it bleeds, it leads. So what that means is the media needs viewership, it needs clicks, it needs attention. And so what you do is you throw the worst stuff out there and you make that headline news, you put it on the front page because that's what's going to get people's attention. You don't want to lead with, record donations to charity helps so-and-so on the front page if at the same time there was something like the Las Vegas shooting, like a tragedy happening, or a 9/11 or something like that. Well, obviously 9/11, that's a little different because that was world changing. So it was, I think that is a huge factor in the difference between perception and reality, because the reality of the numbers are the numbers. Like this comes from FBI statistics, this comes from census.gov. Like these are like solid numbers right here, but just the perception that the media portrays, I would have expected it to be a lot higher. So it was less deaths than I was expecting and less mass shootings. And I would like even just the 724 number or 754 number, whichever it was. But man, once we went to the FBI active shooter incident reporting criteria, that was like actually shocking to me. Didn't expect that. I thought the numbers would be a lot higher. And again, it's because those are the big stories, right? And they're big stories because they're tragedies and they're terrible, and I wish that they wouldn't happen. But when it's put in front of you over and over and over and over, you normalize it and you think that it happens more than it does. And so, the surprise that I'm feeling, I also kind of have relief in a way where I feel better knowing that perception isn't always reality. At least when it comes to violence like that. So, personally, I did think that overall violence would be higher in relation to gangs and drugs. So, like I said earlier, the 16% is the widely accepted conservative number, and then it could be as high as 20 to 25%. And again, that's going to fluctuate based on where it's happening, whether it's urban, rural. That's going to change things a lot, but also who's reporting the crime, and how it's reported. So even in America, there are differences in how districts will treat and police departments will treat different crimes and how they report those crimes and what it goes down as. And that is something that I actually am looking into with, I'm working on another video looking at the 5 most dangerous cities in the US and the 5 least dangerous, and comparing different demographics, financial situation, education rates, and the next thing that I'm looking at is actually the rate at which offenders are first-time offenders versus repeat offenders. Obviously, this year has been a big year for, kind of looking at people who've been released from prison. I'm thinking of Irina with, whatever it was, 16 or 19 times he'd been arrested, released. I'm thinking of the lady on the Blue Line who was lit on fire, and that guy had been caught and released like 23, 24 times, and just the issues that have been brought up stemming from that, which is both sentencing leniency as well as cashless bail, cashless bond. So that's something that I want to look into more, and I'm interested to see what the reoffender rate is versus first time for a lot of these different criterias. So looking at the factors that lead to violence or lead to just crime occurring, it seems like homogeneity is not as big of a factor as I thought. So, an example that would support that would be Japan. That would support homogeneity being a positive in reducing crime. Is, the idea behind it is basically that if people have a shared identity, common identity, there are less things for you to fight about. The United States is pretty unique in the Western world with our race relations of our citizens, right? There's a ton of history there. There's a ton of animosity and long held prejudices in different things from all sides, right? But if you go into Japan, where I believe 98% of the population is ethnically Japanese, there isn't those obvious things to fight about, right? Like the most obvious would be skin color, right? You when you see somebody, you cannot help but notice what color they are. Where in Japan, it's just, everybody kind of looks the same, and everybody has, probably, I didn't look this up, but I would imagine like 90+% of Japanese people have brown eyes and dark brown or black hair, right? And most of it straight, like, again, 90+%. But if you look at a country like America, you could have a like really black person, you could have a medium black person, a light-skinned black person, you could have non-white Hispanic, you could have Hispanic that identifies as white. You could have Caucasian. You could have Asian. You could have Pacific Islander. You could have Native American, and just all those skin tones going from, basically the entire palette of humanity. We have Indians living in America. We have Pakistanis living in America. We have Australasia or Oceanic people living in America. Like we have everybody. We have straight hair, curly hair. We have blue eyes, black eyes, green eyes, blue-green eyes. We have all of those different things. And unfortunately, just due to tribalism and like the natural inclination of people to create in-groups and out-groups, every single one of those things is a potential excuse for creating an out-group. But a great example where that doesn't matter as much is Malaysia. So Malaysia, I think around 2/3 of their population are considered to be Malay, which is the native ethnic group. But they have a large population of Chinese, Indian. They have other like smaller tribal groups that are ethnic minorities that didn't become the dominant group on the peninsula. So they're ethnically diverse, religiously. They're majority Sunni Muslim because Malay are born and they are immediately inculcated into the Muslim faith, but they do not. They practice freedom of religion. They have that in the books. So there are Christians and Hindu and even just different sects of those religions as well. So it's not a homogenous society by any means, but they have ridiculously low numbers for everything, both murder rates, assault rates, rape, everything else. And they are a very well developed country. They have very good records, and they have extremely strict gun laws. The UK has strict gun laws. Australia has strict gun laws. So strict gun laws stop gun violence, but not violence itself. So that's one of the takeaways that I had as well. And again, we just have to go back and look at this chart where, again, super strict, super strict, super strict, super strict. Now, these two that's crazy, but those are outliers. When you look at these from a Western perspective, are more relevant, just from how our societies developed. We came from, common ancestors. We have a lot of ties back to the Roman Empire. We still, that's why we have Capitol buildings in different states are built to emulate that architectural style. That's why we have the eagle. That's why we have, and it's because we're trying to cosplay basically that idea of like Roman power, Roman dominance. So UK and Germany extremely strict, but they have way more assaults than the USA. So again, that just goes back to my belief that it's a lethality issue, not a violence issue. Harsh penalties, strong police deter violence. So Malaysia has extremely harsh penalties for crime. I believe that they halted death penalties back in like 2018, but they were routinely committing capital punishment as a penalty for high crimes like murder, drug smuggling, things like that, like really, really serious crimes that you would get executed for. But they also, the famous example I believe happened in Singapore was of caning, where it was like back in like 2010 or something. I think it was an American student went and broke a law, and he was acting like an American basically. And you don't do that in Singapore, because they publicly caned him in the street even after the US State Department was like, hey, return him, like don't do anything. And they go, no, he broke the law, he's gonna get his ass whipped. And that is not fun. So he's basically beaten within an inch of his life publicly. And super harsh penalties. but also strong police. So Malaysia, I believe it was 370 police officers per 100,000 citizens. So it's actually high, like that's on the higher end. Japan also has a really high police number of officers per capita, but they also practice having very visible police. Like if we've seen Tokyo Drift, like classic AE 86 Corolla police car, that's a dream car for me. But anyway, Japan, in terms of not just strong police, but also criminal justice and criminal reform, is their focus on rehabilitation. So you don't have repeat offenders, you don't have bail jumpers who just go back out and do the same thing again, get re-released, do the same thing again. So their focus on rehabilitation. And again, this alone could be one giant video, just looking at the effects of penalties, strong police or visible police, rehab focus versus, the US, it's just either throw them back out on the street or throw them in jail. Like, there's hardly a focus. I know Norway is a really, really famous example of kind of the anti-United States with their prison system. So just looking at the examples and the spread, I think culture is likely a huge, huge modifier. Some of that comes down to individualism versus collectivism, where Japan, for example, is collectivist. They have the idea of kind of a group identity and being part of a whole, not the whole world revolving around you. And I think that's a shortcoming that the United States has with our culture, where we don't, it's kind of that like if I can go to a right-wing example, kind of a meme would be like, you're never taking my guns. Like, oh yeah, you can't do that. Like, I don't care what the sign says. I'm bringing my gun in there. And, and it's like that idea of like, you as an individual, like your rights and opinions supersede the rights, opinions, and needs of everybody else around you. And that's an extreme example. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I think that we definitely trend more towards that extreme than we do towards, what you see in a lot of Asian countries. I think that also the United States has a problem with glorifying violence, where, even from a young age, like I think the first time I ever played Grand Theft Auto, I was like 10 or 11. Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and it didn't affect me in the sense that I've never committed a crime, I've never assaulted somebody, I've never killed anybody, but you roll the dice enough times over enough people, a large enough sample size, where that's not to say that video games make people violent. That's not true. Everybody knows that's not true. That's ridiculous. It's a 90s mom Karen argument. But when you have violent video games and you have violent lyrics and violence in movies and violence in TV shows, and all of it kind of wraps up to where you become desensitized toward seeing, and the idea would be that then you're desensitized toward potentially committing violence or participating in violence. I think there's a lot of merit to that argument, where if you have, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but just as an example, in a lot of black communities and black culture, where they've been dealt a shitty hand based on socioeconomic circumstances that were out of their control, out of our control, where you have higher rates of poverty, lower rates of lower income as a demographic, and along with those you have lower rates of education, like graduation rates for high school, college degrees, and in that you have higher rates of participation in gangs. You have much more likely per capita to commit violence. And that's not because they're black. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the conditions in which they find themselves in, right? Where single parenthood, especially single motherhood, is the number one predictor of economic position going forward. And if, you know, fathers or mothers aren't in the family and there's not a family unit, you don't have a role model to look up to. And then when you don't have a role model to look up to, and you know the streets are violent, what do? You need protection, you go join a gang, right? And that is uber simplified. It honestly might be a little generic. But then, you know, you look at, okay, what kind of music is associated with Black America? What kind of attitude? Where, you know, there was a study that actually I want to do in the top 5 violent versus top 5 least violent cities in America, talking about the difference in hood culture, which that can be anybody, you know, but that hood culture of not taking disrespect and amplifying situations, and not learning or not knowing how to de-escalate in different things. And a lot of that comes back to what you put in your head and what you glorify in your private time, you know. And that's not to say that listening to the Notorious B.I.G. is going to make you go out and shoot somebody, but if that's what you're around 24/7 and that's what you're raised up with, I think that the statistics bear out the argument that does affect that. And that's another deep dive I want to do. And yeah, I mean, this I kind of touched on this, but yeah, inequality and poverty are highly correlative toward violence. Again, Brazil is that example of high inequality, and then Japan and Malaysia are both examples of relatively low inequality. The United States, you know, that like, it depends on where you're looking, right? Look at Irvine, California. Look at Hollywood, Beverly Hills, California, and now go look at St. Louis, Missouri. Go look at Miami, Florida, and then go look at Baltimore. Like inner city Baltimore or inner city Detroit. You know what I mean? So I've found that really fascinating, and I've done probably 14 hours of research into that top 5 versus bottom 5 cities. So, okay, here are my opinions. So, even taking a conservative number from defensive gun use, like I'm talking in this situation, sheerly numbers, the benefits outweigh the negatives, where we already have 120 guns per 100 people. You're never going to get all of those. You can't ban it. It's that idea of like lightning's already out of the jar. So then we got to look at what we're dealing with. And if we're dealing with just over 18,000 murders committed every year with guns, but then guns are stopping 60,000 as the most conservative number that we have is 60,000. So over 3 times the number of crimes are stopped utilizing a gun in a defensive measure, even if it's just brandishing, not even firing. That's still over 3 times more than how many are murdered every year. And then, I mean, if you take the high end of that, 2.5 million per year. 2.5 million versus 18,000. So just mathematically, just looking at it as arithmetic, the positive outweighs the negatives in that regard. And then if we look at those numbers, you know, statistically, if we're concerned about death, we need to focus even more on healthy living. You know, heart disease and diabetes are 2 of the top 5, top 6. Diabetes kind of can fluctuate year to year. But that's, you know, like 680,000 people a year die due to heart disease. And, a lot of that stems from eating out a lot and food deserts and, just our really high sodium intake and high fat, high meat, not enough veggies, not enough exercise. So if we're talking about numbers in terms of, because the whole point of this conversation, in my opinion, is, this being a case for the Second Amendment, is that more lives are saved or more lives are benefited from having the Second Amendment than not. And that's without even getting into the potential stuff where, people will say, oh, it's for us to fight tyranny. And yes, that's what it was originally, I believe. Not that the United States population would stand up very well in the very, very almost impossible situation that the entire military turned against the population. That's never going to happen. There's always going to be... That's not going to happen. But theoretically, yeah, no, there's nothing we can do. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter how many small arms I have. I can't stop an Abrams tank from coming down my street. There's just nothing. So, ignoring the edge cases, the extreme example on that side, it's, are more lives saved or more lives lost? And the numbers for defensive gun use would bear out that more guns are saved. So the idea is, how can we better our society? Instantly, if you're just looking at gun deaths, look at all deaths. And when you look at all deaths, what do you see? Nearly a 40% obesity rate. That again, that fluctuates year to year, 36 to 41 or 38 to 41. But that is a significantly larger and more impactful issue to Americans every single year than the right to bear arms is. So in talking about that, tackling the sources of violence, not the instruments of violence. So, people will say criminals don't obey laws. That's a tacky, but it's true, right? Laws don't apply to the lawless. You ban guns and you're going to use knives. And then the UK stabbings, they got so bad that they have those, they were seizing knives. They had those knife turn-ins where, it wasn't even oh, he has a machete or a parang or a katana or something like that. It was kitchen knives. And it's oh, so are we going to ban cutlery? What are we supposed to do? How am I supposed to cut a steak? It's that argument of, if you're trying to regulate the tool instead of the source, you're just going to keep changing what tool it is. You know what I mean? If you ban semi-auto weapons, then people will start killing. The majority will shift to, oh, okay, well, we're going to kill people with bolt-action rifles. Then you ban bolt-action rifles, and then they're going to kill with lever-action rifle. Then you ban lever-action rifle. And it's how far back do we need to go before we realize that attacking the instrument is not going to solve the problem. So, when we're looking at the source of violence or what causes violence, that's a whole can of worms. I touched on a lot of these. USA reoffense rates, so criminals committing crimes multiple times. So that's a lot of criminal justice reform. Looking at our sentencing, honestly, at this point, even how our courts are structured, where they don't have, the majority of cases don't go to court. They cut deals, they take plea bargains, they plead guilty. And in my opinion, if the system is not able to handle the volume of cases that it's being presented with, then it cannot function, and therefore it is not delivering justice to its people. It just isn't. Fighting poverty and inequality, shifting culture away from the glorification of violence, especially in the young. And we do that in some ways where PG-13 movies, rated teen, rated M games, and trying to gatekeep in that way works to an extent, but ultimately it comes down to where we place our value and attention as a society. And that's not going to happen overnight. And hopefully it does happen, and it'll take time. It's always a pendulum. I like to think that every generation tries to learn from the last about what worked, what didn't work. And yeah, you have some penduluming back and forth, but that successive approximation over generations, I truly hope that it does. I believe and hope that it does and will continue to just, lead us to be better. Here's a really strong argument, in my opinion, for why the Second Amendment is actually really important. And it's that firearms level the playing field. They are the ultimate equalizer. Your sex, stature, weight don't matter anymore. You could have Conan the Barbarian threatening you, and you could be a 100-pound woman, and you are now, since the advent of firearms, you have more ability and reliability to defend yourself against anybody. The advantages that men have over women, for example, in physicality, right? Where 99% of men are stronger than like 99% of women that are of comparable size or age, whatever, right? Just look up the difference in world record weightlifting or Olympic record weightlifting. Look up the 100-yard dash records. There's a clear difference between men and women, and that's okay, because our differences are what make us special and different, and we can celebrate those without being stupid about it, please. So if you take just a random 21-year-old girl and you place her in an alleyway, and you take a random 30-year-old man and drop him in that alleyway, realistically, what are the chances that the man is able to overpower the woman? Almost every single time, right? Now, if that girl has a firearm, it does not matter how big that guy is. If she knows what she's doing, and if she's trained and she can use it effectively, her life is saved, or she is saved from being sexually assaulted or raped or robbed instantly. And there's never been a period of time where that is such an absolute statement. Obviously, like in the past, if a woman happens to have like a hidden knife or dagger on her, or she just happened to be an expert archer and was far enough away that she could draw a bowstring and fire, like those were edge cases and unreliable and not comforting in the sense that they're not replicable across 100% of women and 100% of men. But as soon as you introduce a firearm, whoever has that firearm is the one who's in control, and that person, it doesn't matter how big they are. And I think that is a very strong argument, actually, to say that advocating for the Second Amendment on that basis is actually one of the most feminist things that you could do, or pro-woman things that you could do, is because of that. Like, if you just think about it from that perspective, I want every woman who is important to me to have a concealed firearm, or the option to, the ability to, and the training and the know-how to be comfortable doing that. Because God forbid something happens, their chances immediately flip from like you're definitely in trouble to you actually have a chance. And again, that was not the case up until like the modern age, meaning like postmodern era. Like, I don't know, we could just pick a number, like post World War II, whatever. I don't know. So again, just to reiterate some of the challenges with this, for the analysis portion, I do recognize that I have my own positive bias toward the Second Amendment. I grew up with two grandfathers who served, one in the Marine Corps, I believe is a master sergeant, and he was like the range master for training, like that kind of a thing. And the other was a Navyman who served in the Korean War and saw action constantly. So I was never like afraid of guns. I was respectful. The first time that I fired a gun at my paternal grandfather's house, I was probably 9 or 10. It was just a little .22 revolver. But just with that basis, I enjoy shooting. I have multiple guns. I have multiple handguns, multiple rifles in multiple calibers, because I get fascinated just with the mechanics, the engineering behind it. I have it for home defense. I have a concealed carry permit. I think they're cool. I think they're fun. The adrenaline that you get when you're shooting, and just the accomplishment of when you are doing drills and you successfully beat your PR and you knock 4 targets down faster than you've ever done it before. I think I get a lot of personal enjoyment out of it. So, and then just growing up in that environment, I understand that there is a bias, which is why I'm trying to look at the numbers and then make my opinions based off of it. That's not to say that I still don't have that bias and that it's not affecting how I interpret the data, but the data is the data. Again, underreporting is super widespread. Like, it was so frustrating to think about those numbers being 10 to 20 times higher than what is actually reported. It's a fucking shame. Defensive gun use, attempted robbery, minor assault, they're all likely to be underreported. And yeah, that was the thing with the defensive gun usage, is that if you brandish and the guy runs away, it's like, yeah, you might not even report that. If somebody tried to rob, that might even be the same instance right there. Is, he tried to rob you, you brandished, he ran away. Well, that's one case of DGU and one case of attempted robbery that weren't reported. Minor assault, like if somebody's just getting pushed or like one punch or something like that, like most cases you're not gonna, like if it's just a barroom scuffle and nobody gets hurt, nobody's even bleeding, like it's most of the time I feel like that would go underreported. That's just a feeling. I don't have anything to like back that up, because again, the underreporting means that I don't have the numbers and I want the numbers. So the lack of statistics is annoying, especially in developing nations, because there was a number of countries that I wanted to use that I couldn't, because I would get, I'd get like 7 government resources in, and then I'm like, dude, they don't have anything. They just do not have the records, or they don't have them digitized, or they don't have like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's frustrating. Yeah, so I don't know. What do you think? Do the numbers bear out the conclusions? Am I a little too biased in my analysis over here? And did any numbers surprise you? Because I definitely was surprised by a handful of stats that I either thought were going to be way higher or I thought they were going to be way lower. But yeah, those are the numbers. I will put all of the sources, like it's going to be a ton of links, but I might even upload it as like a Google Doc or something. Actually, that might be better, just for everything that I used as a resource, even if it was just for context. I'll put everything in there, and you guys can look through and decide if I gave this a fair shake, and if my conclusions were fair or not. So thanks for watching, if anybody does watch this, and I'll catch you on the next one.